Welcome to the Healthcare Technology Report, a leading information source on healthcare technology companies and solutions. Today, we speak with Eric Dye, co-founder and CEO of Bloomlife, a women's health company using connected devices and data analytics to improve access to prenatal care and help clinicians detect pregnancy complications earlier. Eric trained as a biomedical engineer and co-founded Bloomlife in 2014 after experiencing firsthand the challenges of a high-risk pregnancy in his family. He previously worked across next-generation sequencing, remote patient monitoring, and specialty imaging before turning to maternal health. Bloomlife's remote monitoring platform and predictive analytics are helping providers manage risk and deliver better outcomes, with the goal of eliminating preventable complications and making modern maternal care accessible worldwide. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
You as well.
Excited to get into the company, as well as your background, as well as kind of topics around entrepreneurship. Maybe where we can start is, how does someone like you get into this specific field of healthcare technology? And maybe you can explain the context to my question to the audience.
Yeah, sure. I think everyone's path into their careers is always an interesting one. So, I grew up in a healthcare family. My father was a general surgeon. My mom was an ER nurse. So I grew up around healthcare my whole life. I assumed I would be a doctor like my father, but I think he was jaded with the healthcare system like many doctors. And this was back in the day. And I think he kind of discouraged it in a way. And so I ended up going into engineering, studied bioengineering at Cornell. I did a PhD in biomedical engineering at UCLA. I was working overseas as a postdoc at a research institute in Belgium called IMEC. And I love science, I love technology, but I have not cut out for the lab. And so I ended up switching into a business development role, was leading business development for this company throughout North America, eventually moving back to the US. And in that capacity, one of the big areas that I was covering was in our healthcare business line. And there we were essentially helping other companies accelerate their R&D roadmaps. And the work we did spanned everything from like next-gen sequencing through remote patient monitoring technologies. And I got really interested in the work we were doing in remote patient monitoring technologies. There we were developing underlying sensors and technologies to essentially help either shift care from high-cost clinical settings to home through home monitoring. We were doing a lot of stuff, even in consumer wearables at the time, and got a chance to see sort of firsthand how the technologies at the forefront of the space were evolving. One of the big projects we did was for a company called Biotelemetry, developing a cardiac monitoring patch for them, which had gone on then to get acquired by Philips for just under $3 billion. And it was that area that really captured my imagination of just like where the future of health was going. And so my co-founder was one of the program directors at IMEC. I was going out selling deals. He was coming in and helping to kind of execute the development. And we decided to leave and start our own company. And we were looking at areas where there was the convergence of consumer medical markets. Our belief was, and this was back in like 2011, that consumer devices would become medical devices, and that the technologies that we would wear around on our daily lives would start to provide healthcare insights. And we were looking for areas of medicine where there was an untapped need on the clinical side, and where there could potentially be like a thirst for more information from a consumer or patient side. And around that time, I was into a very long, painful fertility journey with my partner to try to start a family. And we spent, 6 years in fertility treatment and had a bunch of miscarriages, and then had a high-risk pregnancy with all sorts of complications, and just saw this area of women's health and maternal health as like a huge unaddressed area. And so we decided, hey, wouldn't it be great if we started a company here? And then granted, this was like back in like 2014. And first-time entrepreneurs were stupid and didn't realize that there weren't any investors investing in this area. But like that's where we started, and we're pretty determined people, I guess, as all entrepreneurs are. And so we really grinded it out for a number of years, trying to kind of like build this business in the area. So that's essentially how I got into starting a company and then the women's health space.
It sounds like on surface, it's a very important problem to solve. And there's so many soon-to-be mothers that experience a lot of anxiety because they're not able to understand in real time what's happening in the womb. I imagine it was competitive at the time. I recall there was a company called Nuvo I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but
Yeah.
I'm sure there were many companies that were trying to approach this space. Can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to shape your exact product and solution, knowing there were other competitors out there?
Well, the interesting thing is when we started the company, part of what motivated us was, as mentioned, this kind of convergence of consumer medical. And we saw one of the big unlocks of the area is building unique data sets because, women's health has been massively underfunded from a research perspective, maternal health even more so. And so when we initially started the company, we actually developed and launched a consumer product, medical grade technology. It was a little patch that women can put on their belly. And the idea was to help women track and time contractions, right? Something simple. But we saw, hey, a lot of people aren't sure about these things. And so we launched this in the consumer space, direct to moms, not trying to make any healthcare claims. And the goal was to try to address questions, concerns that women had during their pregnancy, and then behind the scenes to start to crowdsource large physiological data sets that we intended to use for biomarker discovery to develop medical grade solutions. And so when we started the company, there was very few women's health companies. There was no dedicated VC funds. General VCs certainly weren't investing in women's health. I mean, we can't tell you how many times we got told by investors, like, you need to focus on a larger market. Women's health is not a market. There's not a large enough market. I think that perspective, has changed. I think we've addressed that, I believe, for the most part.
Yeah.
But at the time, there was very few. And so we were working on that consumer product for about 4 or 5 years. We built this product. We launched it to great fanfare. We won all sorts of awards because it was a really cool, innovative technology. We successfully shipped to about 14, 15,000 women. We built this large data set. We actually did do a first round of biomarker discovery and developed an algorithm to identify labor onset. And then the walls came crashing down upon us because the FDA came knocking and we're like, this product should be regulated. This happened around 2019, 2020. And at that point, then we had to really massively pivot the business into what we're doing now. And so to answer your question, when we pivoted the business to focus on enterprise healthcare, at that point, there was more and more companies. I mean, Nuvo was out there, Baby Scripts was out there. There's a bunch of companies trying to do various things. And I think as we looked at the market and as we kind of understood where the clinical area of needs were, we really identified high-risk pregnancies is the kind of the right starting point if you're trying to innovate within enterprise obstetric care. And so that is kind of the tack that we took. And so in that capacity, we said fetal monitoring, which is where we kind of have moved the product, our own proprietary device, which we could talk about, is certainly a critical component of maternal health, but it's in and of itself, it's not enough. You also want to look at all the other underlying conditions that are super prevalent in high-risk pregnancies and how do you improve screening and monitoring of those. And so we added in a hypertension management program, we added a diabetes management program, and then the fetal monitoring component is kind of what makes us unique in the space, is being able to have that component as well as all the other ones. And so how we started thinking about it differently to more directly answer questions is, one, segmenting the market differently. And through there, thinking about what are the holistic set of solutions that an obstetric, OB/GYNs, healthcare providers, what do they need to improve care delivery within that area?
And so, you have, I guess, two customers. One is the actual physician and one is the actual patient.
Right.
Are you, when you kind of think about your go-to-market, is it to the physician?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we have permanently closed down, shut down, to many of our prior users' dismay, everything that's kind of direct to the patient, direct to consumer, everything now is B2B2C. And so we sell into healthcare organizations that deliver prenatal care, postpartum care. It could be private practices, it could be health systems, it could be federally qualified health clinics. Anyone who's delivering care to expectant women are good customers for us.
And is it like a kit where you have certain devices and then those plug into kind of a software solution? How do you kind of present the full offering to a healthcare organization?
Yeah, I mean, essentially the value prop is that, and the messaging is that, like, healthcare organizations today and OB/GYNs, they are really struggling. The way that they have been delivering maternal care is super antiquated, especially for high-risk pregnancies. So about 1 in 4 pregnancies are high risk. They drive over 70% of payer spend. And a lot of the costs associated with high-risk pregnancies around birth, right? Adverse birth events. And the only way you improve that is by actually improving management during the prenatal phase. But the way that they're delivering care today is like a lot of in-person appointments, home monitoring with like pen and paper, sending logs back. It's a very cumbersome process for the providers. And so what we offer is a service these organizations don't want to buy a bunch of blood pressure cuffs, or blood glucose monitors, or fetal monitors, and have to deal with like inventory management. It's a service. And so we sell into healthcare organizations. Doctors prescribe our services to their patients based upon whatever risk factors they have. We will ship to the patient everything they need to monitor from home. So if they have hypertension, we'll send them a cell-enabled blood pressure monitor. If they have diabetes, we'll send them cell-enabled glucometers, test strips, lancets. When they get into the third trimester and they need fetal monitoring, we'll send them a fetal monitor. Everything is ordered directly through the EMR. And then we help facilitate data capture from the patient's home, following whatever the clinical schedule is, transmission to the cloud. We triage that data, and then we drop that back into clinical workflows, including the EMR, such that the care teams can review, triage data, follow up with the patients as needed. And so we really think about it's a service offering rather than like a medical device company per se. And yeah, and try to like remove all the friction for the patients to follow the clinical recommendations for monitoring, and then remove all the friction for the providers to make sure the patients get monitored and get the information they need when they need it in the right places to be able to proactively follow up with the moms.
And so are the moms viewing information as soon as it's available to the physician, or the physician first screens it?
It kind of depends. So for like the hypertension diabetes solution, the patient always gets immediate feedback because oftentimes there's something they need to do. And so our solution is designed such that after every measurement, the patient's going to get real-time feedback if everything's okay, if there's anything else for them to do. And that helps ensure quality of care, patient safety, helps mitigate liability. On the fetal monitoring solution, there, the FDA is very clear, like they want the data to be reviewed by the provider before the mom does anything. And so that data is sent to the clinical teams. They do the normal interpretation of the data, and then they'll notify the patient if there's anything else to be done. At some point, I think there's definitely an opportunity to kind of like use some of these AI algorithms to actually do some of the initial interpretation, but that's like a later thing that we'll work on.
And how would you describe the stage you're at currently with the company?
So we've been around for a while, but in all fairness, I think we built two separate companies. I mean, we built a consumer company and had to shut that whole thing down. And then we essentially built an entirely new business focused on enterprise healthcare. Like the masthead is the same, but the businesses are entirely different. And there's a lot of lessons learned there, by the way. So I'd say right now, we are early commercial ramp right now. We have partners with healthcare organizations throughout the country. We validated that this product delivers a lot of value to the patients. It provides a lot of value to the providers. We validated our reimbursement strategy. And right now we're scaling growth, right? So we have a number of very large partnerships that are closing and coming online. We have a strategic channel partner with a company called Paragon, which is acting as a channel into health systems throughout the country. We just closed our recent round of financing to kind of like provide capital for the next couple of years. And so now it's just like scaling up our solution to continue to prove out the underlying assumptions under the revenue model and keep growing, right? Keep improving the product.
Is there one kind of constraint or one part of the business where you think if you could just unlock that, it would, obviously there's multiple things you're working on simultaneously, but is there one thing that if you could solve it would really help accelerate your growth?
That is a very good question. We obsess about workflow integration. Like we believe that that's where these kind of products will live and die. And as a consequence of that, our sales process, we go a little bit slower during the sales process to make sure that we are getting the input of all the folks that will be impacted from a workflow perspective as these solutions go live. And that process takes time, and it requires the availability of the entire healthcare team, like not just the doctors. Like a clinical champion is for sure important, but you also need the nurses. Sometimes you need MAs, like you need the billing team. And these practices are insanely busy. Like they are so busy. And so we could change anything is like everyone on the clinical team having like one administrative day per week to meet with companies like ours, because there isn't a single organization we met with that does not see the value of what we're doing and how this could transform their care. It's just getting everyone's availability quickly enough to kind of move all the deals along. So if there was like even a half admin day per week of these folks, and we could get deals done within like a couple of weeks or 2 months rather than the time that usually takes. That would be the biggest unlock.
Excellent. We're entering into the tail end of the conversation. Before I ask the last two questions, we'd love to hear about what you think Cornell gave you, or maybe what you learned at Cornell, a key insight. My wife and I went there. We're big supporters of the school, but we'd love to hear anything you can say about Cornell.
I think the biggest thing is this idea of like always be learning and knowing how to learn things, I think is a big one. And there in particular, there was, I think the best class I took, interesting, was one where there was like not really a professor. There was this auto tutorial biochem class. And that class, as well as other classes at Cornell, like really like, how do you have a problem in front of you that is super complex? And how do you like break it down and start to like learn? Instead of being taught something, like how do you self-learn, I think is probably the biggest thing. And that is something that, I think is valuable for everyone, especially in this day and age of like rapidly changing technologies. And then our way of working is constantly evolving. And so the curiosity, and maybe that's kind of innate, but like knowing how to learn things, I think is probably served me best.
All right, Eric, last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who's had a profound influence on you?
I'd probably say, honestly, probably my parents. Again, just growing up in a healthcare family.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, like when you're growing up, you don't really think anything of it. But in thinking back on like my childhood, just like sitting around like the dinner table and them talking about like healthcare related matters like constantly, like there's like the osmosis of that. I think that of like getting this curiosity of healthcare and how things work and overall just kind of like I think a work ethic of just not being afraid to do hard things and stick with it. And so I think that's probably the two people that have had the most significant impact on me.
My last question is typically, can you tell us about a charity cause or other endeavor that you're passionate about? But I feel like your company is like a cause and endeavor, all of that wrapped in one. Maybe just tell us how you like to spend your time aside from work and family.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think we are very much a mission impact driven business. I mean, that is what motivates so many folks on the team, right? Is that aspect. So yeah, how I like to spend my time is anything outdoors. Anything I can get away from my computer. I mean, I spend like 99% of my time sitting in front of a screen. And so when I have time off, I like to drag my kid out into the woods and get off screens and just do any kind of adrenaline driven activity. So skiing, used to do some rock climbing, hiking, anything that's outdoors is where you can find me when I'm not in front of this computer.
Awesome. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Appreciate it, RJ.